Chief Happiness Officer, Head of Wellbeing, Chief Sustainability Officer, Diversity and Inclusion Leader. These things have always been important in business, and our understanding of the need for these roles has never been better. So why is it sometimes still so hard to see positive change? Today, we answer the big question, are the most important jobs those that shouldn't exist?
I always say that, when my job doesn't exist, and that's what I'm working for, my job's done.
If everyone's reliant on me within our organisation to make that change, I think we've got the wrong answer.
We have to get everybody else to do the things that we say that we should do, not just listen to us when there's a problem. We're not the DE&I police.
It is hard, but I don't think that we should let anything that is hard stop us doing it.
Hello and welcome to the Green Room by Deloitte. I'm Annie Wong and I'm really excited to introduce a new face and voice next to me today. Steph Dobbs has recently joined us as our newest host. How are you, Steph? Excited for your Green Room debut?
Thanks, Annie. I'm very excited. Yes, feeling very green. So please bear with me. And we are in a very green room, it turns out. So yeah, excited to be here in the new job, so to speak.
No, exactly. And being a podcast host is obviously a fantastic job. But today we're asking, are the most important jobs those that shouldn't exist? If you scroll LinkedIn or job sites, you'll probably come across a lot of roles such as Chief Happiness Officer, Head of Wellbeing, Head of Sustainability, Head of EDI or Equity, Diversity and Inclusion. And they're all for really important areas where organisations have made some really good progress. However, more is needed, more is always needed, such as being a truly inclusive business, having truly sustainable operations, etc. Today we're asking, is the only way to make meaningful change to have these dedicated roles, and will we always need them?
And so to answer this question, joining us in the studio today, we have Naomi Sesay, a keynote speaker on the topic of diversity in business and head of creative diversity at Channel 4. And we've also got Smruti Naik-Jones, who's Chief Sustainability Officer for Deloitte UK and Deloitte North and South Europe. So welcome to you both.
Thank you.
So perhaps we'll kick off with Naomi to begin with. So we'd like to talk to you a little bit about your role and what exactly it sort of entails. So can you tell us a little bit about it and how does it sort of fit within your organisation's strategy? Did you see yourself doing this perhaps 20 years ago?
Well, to answer your first question, my role as Head of Creative Diversity is now actually Creative Equity. We've changed the name slightly just to kind of like emphasise the equity in it. Channel 4 is, I sit on the commissioning floor, and what I do is make sure that all our off-screen and on-screen productions, our teams, our content, everything to do with what goes out into on our television screens is equitable, is included people who are missing, and has a very healthy mix of diversity. And did I think about doing it 20 years ago? Actually, no. The role probably didn't exist, it was very, very, a small role. But I was always doing it. I was always looking around thinking, who is missing? And I always came up with challenges as well, where I had a company called the Billionaire Ladies Club. You cannot do a company with just all women. You need to have that diversity of thought inside it. And so it quickly kind of like dissipated after a while because there was something missing. And that was, the gender aspect of that particular company. So I was always doing it, but not in a specific role as I am now.
Great stuff. So Smruti, let's come to you next then. So you are Chief Sustainability Officer for Deloitte. Can you tell us a little bit about that and how did you arrive in that role?
So my role is really about making sure we as an organisation in Deloitte are much more sustainable. And what that really means is that we're focused on playing our part in terms of mitigating climate change, making sure that we are leaving a more positive environment than we've received it. So, and that ties in really neatly with some of the equity pieces that Naomi was talking about, because we know a lot of this is very interconnected as part of that. And did I think I was going to come into this? I think my parents really wanted me to be a doctor or an engineer or a lawyer, one of those sort of standard careers. So I think I always saw myself as, how do I get into a career that isn't, working in a shop, which is what my parents did, or being in a factory. But actually, as Naomi said, it's always something that you want to be able to feel like you're giving back, and how do you do that in roles? And it was actually quite unusual to find those roles back when I was looking for them. So I'm really pleased that I'm able to be in a role that allows us to do that now.
It's interesting, you both mentioned that both of your roles probably didn't exist 20, 50 odd years ago, or you might have struggled to find one. There was the Dial Global Diversity Review last year that found that most UK companies now do have a head of EDI or a diversity and inclusion lead. Similarly, sustainability roles are becoming more and more common. How have you seen things evolve in your respective businesses? And do you think having these dedicated senior roles that you're both now in has really emphasised the importance of these issues and perhaps unlocked more engagement, more investment, etc.? Naomi, I'll come to you first.
Absolutely, I think that these roles have made an impact, because before, people were just doing business as usual. And then when we actually realised that actually there are people who are marginalised, who are underrepresented, we don't hear their stories, and could that actually blend in with the bigger narrative, for example, in broadcast, that reflects Britain in itself. And so having these roles allows people who had the lived experience to say, yeah, I know this talent over there, let's bring them in, and I know this person, and this will actually enhance and make stories richer. And so these roles were very important to highlight what was missing, because there was definitely lots of different types of areas and roles that just weren't jiving. And of course, we know that diversity has a bottom line and prerogative, that, it hits the bottom line. If you don't bring in different people, you could be missing out on markets, and therefore, your profits could suffer in that way. So it's really important to have these roles. Whether these roles have evolved and whether they are fit for purpose now, because it's kind of like morphed into, especially with the ED&I, morphed into a space where, okay, well, they will solve the world. They can do that. And it kind of gives a pass to everybody else to just kind of like sit down and do what they've always done, without actually really engaging with the real, power of what that role is. So we've got to kind of like change it. Now everyone knows diversity, equity, and inclusion. We've got to change it so that it moves into a space where everybody has it on their plate, and everyone's accountable and everyone's responsible.
Smruti, what about you?
With sustainability, there were probably people doing similar roles actually quite a while ago. They might have been your health and safety specialists, or people who are looking at your real estate, or your waste managers in terms of where you are. I think now, particularly, there's a realisation that this isn't a point solution in a department that might be locked away somewhere. This is very much about business transformation. How are you getting it, as Naomi said, embedded across your business? How are you thinking about everything that you're developing and creating as having, a more positive impact? And are you aware of the impact that it has, even having that understanding? So I think some of these roles are really elevating that, bringing that to the forefront. But also, importantly, these are issues that aren't short-term that we're talking about. They are long-term, pervasive issues. And actually not having somebody really looking at that medium long term, especially within businesses which are much more short term focused, it has meant that they've become more important, because we're almost kind of protecting either the legacy of the organisation, are you going to be here in the future, and for future generations. So actually, are you going to be providing value to the future generations, and what are you leaving behind for them as well? So I think these roles are really starting to kind of crystallise that view.
Absolutely. And I suppose let's maybe talk a little bit more about what the roles do actually bring to the table then. So perhaps, Naomi, to begin with, we see that the fact that Channel 4 has recently released its first equity strategy. So what does that tell us about where the organisation is now, and how does that maybe shape the priorities that you and the team are working on?
I think it kind of like ties in together lots of different aspects. Our suppliers, people inside the team, how we present, not as in presenting on camera, but how do we present ourselves to the world? What are the crucial aspects we have to look at when we think about procurement. So it kind of like the strategy is to tie up all aspects of equity with an equity focus. So looking at not just, relying on equality, which was, the past, looking at how do we help those people who need the resources the most in order to be at the table. And because we're focusing on that, we're not just looking at bringing in loads of diversity and trying getting them to a place where they feel included, but crucially bringing in the resources that help those people get to those tables. And there are lots of protected characteristics that have barriers to entry, and those barriers to entry are not, it's systemic, and it's also to do with structure of the company. So it's about breaking down those structural barriers and the systemic barriers and allowing there to be an even playing field so that you are playing the game on the field instead of just looking on the sides, being at the games, but just looking on the sides. We want you to play the game. So that means that we have to evoke equity in everything we do. And so that means we need a cohesive strategy going forward.
Absolutely. And can you maybe give us a specific example to bring that to life a little bit for the listeners?
Yeah, for example, we were looking at now, there is a lot of talk about lower socioeconomic, especially in broadcast, lower socioeconomic backgrounds. And why is it that traditionally there are lots of people at the top level of an organization, especially in broadcast, are from middle and upper middle class backgrounds? Where are these barriers? And before, it was to do with nepotism, to do with who you knew. If you had parents in a field, the child is more likely to actually go into that field. If you have parents who are not in that field and who are low income, it's hardly likely that you're suddenly going to end up being head of something in a broadcast. So in order to make that equitable, it's understanding who's missing first and how are they coming into the organization? Where are the touch points? How are they hearing about it? Do they know anybody? Is there anyone who can sponsor them? Are there mentorships that you can do? Going into schools, we have this 4 skills where we go into schools and tell people it's not just about being on TV. It's, there's accountants, there's sustainability, there's lots of different areas that you can get into. It's not just the glitz and glam of broadcast, which people sometimes think. So it's finding out where those barriers are and saying, come in, we're going to help you. And for example, with disability, we have people who are disabled have the right to have an interview. If they apply, you have to interview them. So that kind of evens out the playing fields a little bit in terms of equity.
Yeah. That makes total sense. And I suppose, Smruti, then coming to you, sort of maybe talking about priorities for your team, where the firm perhaps currently is at. Can you bring that to life for us?
Of course. I think something like, especially when you're tackling, as Naomi said, a systemic sort of challenge, often it's easy to sort of think, we're not quite there yet. But there's a lot to be proud of. So we've been focused since 2020 around a common, what we call a world climate strategy. So that's really our strategy and commitments that are science-based around how we're going to tackle our emissions and become more environmentally minded in terms of what we do. And we've been able to do that through our operations, looking at our real estate, as I mentioned, our things like our car fleet that we've moved to EV only. But it's also been about empowering our people. So, educating our people, giving them the tools and assets, providing role models that they feel that they can relate to, and just giving them that permission to be able to think more sustainably and to make those conscious climate choices, as we talk about that as well. And then the third part is that actually, because it's systemic, we're not going to be able to do this by ourselves, and we're going to have to work through others and with others in order to do that. And how do we do that big and small? So, how do we inspire and work with local communities and local organisations to do that, as well as some of the large, more pervasive suppliers that we need to engage with to frankly, some of the innovators that we see that will have the solutions of the future. So that's what we've been focused on. And what I would say is, we're getting there. We've had some great successes around some of our operations. There's a bit more work for us to do around really mobilising with our suppliers, but that's something that we hear from all of our clients as well. But actually, what I'm really most proud of is that those stories and those nuggets where you get where that one person who didn't quite get it, who then gets it and is your advocate, and they're talking almost over you because they really want to make the case. And I think that's been amazing to see as well.
Absolutely. And as you say, I think these topics are too big and too important to tackle in complete isolation, right, at the end of the day. So maybe coming back to some of the research that Deloitte's put out recently, there was our recent 2024 CXO sustainability report came out, and there was a lot in there around sort of investment in the sustainability space. What are you sort of seeing when it comes to clients in this topic and other businesses, I suppose?
The piece that I was really pleased to see in our research is that actually CXOs aren't seeing the trade-off. Often it's felt like you can either be sustainable or you can drive business growth. And actually around 92%, so the majority were saying, we can see it now. We can see you can have environmental benefits and business benefits. And actually, they're talking much more about some of the harder pieces. So it's no longer we're doing it for a brand or a profile building. It's much more around actually we're seeing it through our consumer preferences. We're seeing that in terms of our operating margins. We're able to drive supply chain efficiencies, as we've talked about. So actually, it's really getting into the heart of the business. And with that, we're hearing some of the CXOs are really putting their money where their mouth is. So we've seen a 10% increase from last year around people who are investing in their sustainability journey. And with that investment, they're not just saying, we're dealing with compliance. We hear a lot about regulation driving it. We're hearing that they're actually innovating and using those investments, either because they've invested in technology, to actually innovate around new sustainable solutions. And that's really going to change the way the businesses operate. And it's now becoming almost like a commercial imperative. If you're not doing that, you should be asking yourself, are we going to be missing out? Is there something that we should be thinking about?
Definitely.
Just on that point around, and Naomi referred to it before around the bottom line and diversity kind of contributing to that. And Smruti, what you're saying, I think it's really clear that you're both having such a big impact in your respective fields. But where have you seen the positive impact more broadly in your organisations when it comes to winning top talent or driving innovation? Do you have any examples where you can really see the impact outside of your field?
I think for Channel 4, you turn it on and you can see how diverse it is. And it's been like that for a while. It's the champion of, diversity, I think. We had if you remember, Black to Front in 2021, where it was a whole day of just content from Afro-Caribbean talent. And that kind of opened up lots of people's eyes of what talent is out there and what they bring to the table in terms of the richness and the kind of the different perspectives that people have and the different ideas that they have. And so it's given us a big influx of people changing their behavior, changing their ideology, their perceptions, their language, in order to include other people to get that sweet spot of innovation, which comes from a diverse set of people. So, it's really nice to see that. I mean, last year we did a whole inclusion workshops for our commissioning department. And it's nice to see that people are now taking their own initiative and saying, actually, what that person's just said is just not cool, And how do you now deal with that? What's the language you use in order to deal with poor behavior in the workforce? Because what we want is high-performing workforce, right? And so we are seeing that a lot, that people are now going out, even in our sustainability, because we signed up to Albert. We're seeing a lot of people kind of like going out and taking their own initiative to find out and learn about other people's experiences, find out about how the climate change has affected production and what can you do about that in terms of your fuel cost and do you need to fly and all those kind of things. Yes, we're seeing it, but it's slow, and the reason why it's slow is because we are all habitual people. It's all to do with our neurology, where we like doing the things that we know of. And that's the problem, because maybe we should be looking at it a slightly different way instead of giving it loads of information and saying, okay, now go do. We've got to recognize that human beings are habitual and they do the things that they're comfortable with. And to get out of your comfort zone, you have to have a little bit of a nudge to get out of that. And that's going to be an emotional nudge.
Just on that point about it being slow, and I completely agree, it's a culture change, it's behaviour change, it's not going to be done overnight. There has been some recent research talking about how some EDI roles are declining, like the investment is shrinking because businesses are prioritising other areas. Do you see that?
Oh, yes, most definitely. I mean, if you listen to what's going on in the United States, they're cancelling the whole function, saying it's not a business imperative anymore. The business case is done, which is ridiculous to think that, and a very dangerous thing to actually think that. And that backlash is now kind of like seeping into the UK as well. And we actually had at the Edinburgh TV Festival in August, we actually had a panel that our team put up, and is D&I function fit for purpose? Now everyone says yes, but it's still going through the same motions as it did 10 years ago. So the question is, how do we change it so it's now fit for purpose? And it's not that it shouldn't be there, it's now that we have to get everybody else to do the things that we say that we should do, not just listen to us when there's a problem. We're not the D&I police. Right? So yeah. We've got to kind of like find ways of changing that habit that people has as business as usual. That you've got to now include that self-leadership is key to actually wanting to have an inclusive environment that unlocks the innovation of different people from lived experience. But you have to have that motivation behind it, and you've got to be sometimes a psychologist in these fields, don't you? You have to kind of like think about how you would think to get somebody to move on something, and that's quite a difficult thing to do. Yeah. So yeah, there is a backlash, but we're here to stay.
What about then, Smruti, thinking about perhaps like from a sustainability perspective, and that sort of behavioural piece, how do you get people to change behaviour?
Yeah, and I mean, I agree with Naomi, because I think if you're reliant on one person, so if everyone's reliant on me within our organisation to make that change, I think we've got the wrong answer. We need to get everyone, at least raising that awareness, understanding the role that they can play. But that point that Naomi makes, it's switching it, so it's the default. It's the automatic response that you have, that you're doing it. So from a sustainability perspective, it's, taking that sustainability option because it is by far the easiest and most efficient way for you to be able to do that. And how do you build that in? And some of that takes time, some of it takes foundational elements that you need to build in. So whether that is, like for example, at Deloitte, we introduced a sustainable delivery clause that is the default clause that goes in that allows you to have that conversation. So again, rather than thinking, how do I have a conversation with my client about being more sustainable? It's almost there that says, we are going to do this in a sustainable way, and we're going to talk about it. So you take away some of that friction as part of that. But it is hard, but I don't think that we should let anything that is hard stop us doing it, because the benefits are there. So that inclusive thought, that being sustainable, they're quite intertwined in terms of what we need to do. So we know that the science tells us that the impact of climate change is disproportionate for disadvantaged groups. We also know that to find the innovations and the solutions we need to rethink and reimagine the world. And actually you can do that by tapping into indigenous ways of working or traditional ways that might be handed down through generations. You don't get that by almost having a homogenous way of working. So I think that those things are intertwined, and the more of us that are able to do it and more of us can see the benefits of doing it, like the CXOs that I mentioned, the penny is starting to drop, that actually there's a benefit here, I think the better.
That's great, thank you. We're just going to take a quick break and we'll be back after this.
Cook for Good is one of the social enterprises that Deloitte supports through our 5 Million Futures programme. Cook for Good tackles food insecurity, socialisation and barriers to work on a social housing estate in King's Cross in London. They run team building and cooking experiences with corporate teams making meals to share with local residents and outreach organisations. All profits are then used to fund a community programme which includes free cooking classes, employment programmes and a surplus food pantry. To find out more or to book your own team cooking experience, head to cookforgood.uk.
Looking forwards, where do you think your roles will be in 5, 10, 20 years? Do you think we will get to a point where they no longer need to exist? Or do you feel like there will always need to be someone leading the way, encouraging and empowering people to change the way that they think and act?
Well, I always say that, when my job doesn't exist, and that's what I'm working for, my job's done. But I feel that reimagining a different world, I feel that we have to really exemplify what that imaginary world could look like. People like to see stuff, and you can only be something if you can actually see it. So talking about future, I'm actually building the very first female-centric smart city with those principles in mind. So looking at circularity, what does that look like as a base of a city, circularity? What does, being so entrenched with environment that it becomes the environment first rather than business first? So what does that look like? And so I think that in the far future, we may get there, but we're going to go through a bumpy ride of actually changing our neurology and habits in order to get there. Some people are not going to like it. They want profit and growth, profit and growth. But that could be detrimental. As Smruti was saying, that, there are indigenous ways, different types of intelligence that we can include in our remits that has a kinder impact onto the environment, onto people, onto our communities. And if we went out and actually found out what those indigenous principles are and included them into a fast forward future, then we could possibly get there sooner than we think. But, we have to kind of be curious and get out there.
So do we think your job will be around in 20 years, Smruti?
I mean, as Naomi was saying, I think it's an aspiration for our jobs not to be here. I mean, I can see us actually having many more sustainability or green skill-led jobs, because that is going to be the new world that we'll live in. So if you're an HR individual, how do you reimagine how you work with people in a sustainable way that's more inclusive? Whether you're in technology at the moment and you're reimagining what the future looks like, how can you do that so that it is developed for the good and you're aware of the fullest impact that it can have? So it's not necessarily the boxes, as Naomi said, that we put everyone in. Actually, how do we start to move roles so that they're much more lateral and actually they're including a lot more of these elements in those? But as Naomi said, often you do need people that can almost see and visualise and provide that vision for you and for people who may be frankly busy in their day job. I remember talking to my husband, and there's at least 3 years where we can't remember listening to music, watching films or doing anything because I think we were just busy raising our small family. But that's the reality of life. You get stuck in what you're doing. But you do need people to start to share and show you. So at some point, maybe in our lifetime, probably not, as Naomi said, because it's slower. But I think it's definitely an aspiration for us not to have these roles.
Yeah.
On a slightly more personal angle, as I've been listening to what you're both saying, I feel like we can't underestimate the enormity of what both of you are trying to achieve. How do you deal with that pressure, and how do you try and bring people along with you to take more responsibility and accountability outside of people who are just dedicated to doing it?
Well, my hair's falling out.
It looks great.
The job doesn't come without peril. It's quite exhausting because you're fighting against something that's intangible in a way, and it is thought. It's people's habits and behavior and language. And when you are fighting against that and you see that there is a good cause, and you're like, listen, this is, listen, we can see it. Come with us. You have to really understand how your emotions start to have an effect on the people you're trying to create an impact on. Because if you take something away from somebody, there's a void. And if there is a void, they don't know what to fill it in unless you allow them to fill it with something. But then they can say, okay, I get it. And I take that piece of information. But once you're gone, they're like, okay, I've done it now. And it's a once tick box. And they'll go back. Then they all come back to you with the same problem. And you're like, but I told you last time. So it's kind of exhausting to kind of like keep on going over and over the same things again and again. So in order to change, we as practitioners have to change. We have to constantly reinvent how we say things, the language we use, the behavior that we display, and be the person we want them to be. We've got to have habits that show that we are sustainable, that we're environmental first, that we are inclusive, that we can see people in our space that work together in an innovative way that actually takes us all to another level. You have to be that. Other people in the organization don't. So it's quite difficult to kind of like keep that momentum up. And since I say to my team sometimes, anytime you feel like you want to tap out, just tap out, because your mental health is really, really important. And that well-being of your mental health sometimes is not factored in these kind of roles. And so we have to take that agency on ourselves to say, okay, enough's enough. I'm going to go and sit by the sea and talk to the ocean, okay? So, it does take its toll. And I think that's another, when I said at the beginning that we sometimes have to rethink how the role is within an organization, we have to factor in sustainability of the practitioner as well. Because inevitably, sometimes these roles, you can be in it for 2-3 years and then you're like, I'm out. I've got it, because you're burnt out.
We've talked a lot about the fact this stuff shouldn't be side of desk. It needs to be more embedded in organisations. So I suppose a question to both of you is, if there's one piece of advice you have for the rest of us, for people who are not in these roles, to drive change, what would that one piece of advice be?
I think first research, be curious, go out and look around the world, see where, if we look at the world as lots of little pieces of action that you can take, just take one tiny little piece of action and just do that. Just do that and do it well, and then get the habit of doing another one and then doing another one. If you try and take the whole thing as a whole and think, oh my God, you'll get exasperated and you'll think, oh, this is too much, I can't do it. And you'll just kind of like obfuscate your responsibility. But just take one little bit that you think or that you can do and just do that and do that well.
I love that. I feel like you're so right. The whole agenda, whether it be EDI or sustainability, just feels so big and overwhelming. But if you can break it down and just have small behavioural changes that you ingrain it day to day.
Absolutely. It could be just your language. Stop saying certain things and adopt something else. It could be your behavior. Stop going out and taking, paper cups or plastic cups. Use your own sustainable cups and go and get your coffee. Just little things every single day, and then, play a game with it. How much can you do the next day? So it's, and it can be fun, to kind of like make that change. You'll find that within a short period of time, you were here and now you're here, and that's a win.
Definitely.
And I mean, I agree with Naomi. I think that having that growth mindset, not assuming everything that you know is everything that you know, being curious, thinking about the world, and maybe asking the question, you might have a different perspective, but looking to understand why somebody else has a different view, what's behind that, what's driving that, I think is key as part of that. And as Naomi said, those small actions really, really do add up. And who can you inspire? So not only are those small actions, but the conversation that you might have with a colleague, or you might have, with your family. Or we had a climate champion who says, they go to a dinner party and they talk about, because they're so enthusiastic about what they've learned, they actually talk about that at dinner parties, and it's almost like you say, a game of who else they can inspire as they move forward. But even if you just, take a moment to say, should I just be doing this in the way that I've always done it? Is there a different way? Would it have a different impact? I think is a start as part of that.
Yeah. I think that one of the, just as both of us were saying, I think the baseline is nothing changes unless you change. So until we actually, take that self-leadership on and change something, it's not going to change. So the burden's on all of us. We all live in this beautiful world. We all want to feel happy here. So, let's all just make that change.
Yeah, we all have a role to play, for sure. And then what about your advice to businesses and organisations that are perhaps questioning the importance of these roles or wondering how they can make a better impact? What would your advice to them be?
Don't question it. Just do it. You can see that there's momentum. You can see that there is a real imperative to do it. You can see that for your business, if you're going to survive in the next, 10 to 20 years, it's a must. It's not a nice to have, and it's not a good thing to do. It's the only thing to do. So just do it. Just, do your research, go and talk to other people, get excited about it, because, like we were talking about change, once we all start to see the results of that change, it can be magical, because there will be a snowball effect. And reaching that snowball effect is really important, because everything changes at that moment. Everything just suddenly starts to move forward to the way we would like it to be, hopefully.
And maybe I'll take a slightly different tack, because I agree with Naomi, is actually as businesses, think about some of the things that you are worried about and look at it a bit more broadly. So whether that's, the economic outlook, whether that is access or the cost of some of the resources that you have, whether that is attracting the right skills and talent that you want for your organisation. Actually, some of this is all interconnected in terms of, climate change does have an impact on our economics. It does have an impact on scarcity of resources. So if you're not thinking about circularity, then why not? If your, talent and skills, as we know through our own Gen Z and millennial research, are making choices around the organisations that they join, and 2 in 10 have made those choices already, where they've opted out of organisations that aren't thinking sustainably or inclusive. So as Naomi said, it's not a trade-off, it's not an either or, it's are we going to be here in the future? And if you're thinking about that, then why don't you have these roles, is the question you should be asking.
Great advice, thank you. Smruti, Naomi, thank you so much. We have, unfortunately, run out of time. So to wrap us up and bring us back to the big question of the day, in one sentence, if you can, I know it might be difficult, are the most important jobs those that shouldn't exist? Smruti, I'll come to you first.
I would probably rephrase that. Are the most important roles those that should exist more? So that's what I would say.
Great. Naomi?
If you look at the bigger picture of things, and if we had gone down the right path or a different path, and we kind of took in people as one, that we were one, they shouldn't exist. They actually shouldn't exist, but we didn't. We are now here. And so yes, absolutely, they should exist right now in order for us to recorrect ourselves as humanity. And once we start to move down that recorrection, hopefully, they're so important, hopefully we will all get how important they are, we'll all do the things that we should do, and they won't exist.
Amazing. What a good point to end on. Thank you both so much for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thanks for listening to this episode of The Green Room by Deloitte. We release a new episode every other Tuesday with another big question, so don't forget to hit follow or subscribe to this podcast wherever you're listening or watching. That way, you'll be alerted whenever a new episode drops. This podcast is produced by our very own Pod Squad. Original music by Ali Barrett.